Hey guys, Pastor Ben here with another review and reflection. Today I want to talk about The Silver Chair, written by C.S. Lewis. This is the fourth book in the Chronicles of Narnia series. This older edition I've got has the wonderful illustrations by Pauline Baines. Finished reading this with my girls the other night and have been looking forward to doing a quick review on it. So obviously this is a classic. It's been out now for many years, many generations have grown up reading and enjoying all of the Narnia books, including The Silver Chair. I have really just continued to enjoy the experience of sharing these books with my kids that I grew up reading and enjoying myself. They've been a big part of my own formation and imagination, and just to see that taking shape for them has been really a pleasure as well. Narnia is the big thing in our house right now. It's what they play all the time, and so it's been really a joy to share this with them. For those who may not be familiar, I'll kind of just go over the plot briefly. So spoiler alert, right? But it's been out for a while. So The Silver Chair is the fourth book, as I said, in the Narnia series. It very much picks up right after book three, because in the third book, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, we get to see Caspian as a young king exploring the oceans, and Eustace is one of the cousins of the Pevensies. Lucy and Edmund, with Eustace, get pulled into Narnia, and they go on this adventure with Caspian. And at the end of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Lucy and Edmund are told that they will no longer get to come to Narnia. So there's kind of an echo of what happened at the end of the second book, Prince Caspian, where Peter and Susan, the older two siblings, were told they would not get to come back to Narnia. And so there's this sense in which the Voyage of the Dawn Treader kind of leaves things almost closed. It seems like the Pevensey children that we were introduced to, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the first book, their time in Narnia has come to an end. And in many ways, the Voyage of the Dawn Treader could have functioned as the last book. I've actually heard that Lewis, for a while, was kind of thinking or wondering, hey, maybe this is the last book. It's sort of a trilogy. Of course, he kept writing, and we're very grateful for that, because The Silver Chair is a wonderful addition to the series, and it kind of moves the story forward, because it begins with Eustace and a friend of his from the school he's attending, Jill Pole, who get pulled into Narnia, sent by Aslan to help Narnia in a time of need. So this is taking place as Caspian is an old man. He's about to die, and the whole premise of the story is that years before this, Caspian's wife had been bitten and killed by a serpent that many people thought was a witch. And his son, Rilian, so the son of Caspian, Prince Rilian, goes out to try and find this serpent to avenge his mother, and disappears. And no one has heard from him. No one knows where he is. Many people have gone out to try and find him, and no one has had any success. And so now Caspian is at the end of his life, and right as Eustace and Jill are arriving in Narnia, Caspian is actually just set sail to try and meet with Aslan and figure out what he should do when he dies, who should inherit the throne. And so the whole future of Narnia is up for grabs, and Aslan has sent Eustace and Jill to go on this quest and find the lost prince. So they end up meeting with a marshwiggle. It's the first time we're introduced to this species of characters. This marshwiggles, very humanoid, right, but kind of frog-like humans, if you can think of it in that sense. And they have a very dour disposition, and have a very kind of pessimistic view of the world. And so the marshwiggle Puddleglum is their companion and guide, and they go on this quest together. So the book is really unfolding the story of their hunt for Prince Rilian. As I said, it very much flows out of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, because it's picking up some of the same characters. We have Caspian again, we have Eustace again, but it's introducing new elements as well. One of the things I loved, and I had kind of forgotten about this until rereading it, is there are 2 or 3 references to the fifth book in the series, which had, of course, had not been published when The Silver Chair had come out, but I guess Lewis was already kind of working ahead on these things, and so he has several mentions of this story of the horse and his boy, and they hear a ballad of it told at one point, and and there's some references to it. So Lewis is already kind of sowing those seeds in the minds of his readers, so that when the fifth book, the Horse and His Boy, comes out, they'll be eager to receive it. So that'll be the next book I read with the girls. So I'll do a review of that when we finish it. But yeah, there are these neat tie-ins with the Dawn Treader before this, the Horse and His Boy after this. But the story unfolds. They go on this quest. They meet different people. They fall in with these giants and have to run away from them. And they end up escaping from the giants into a cave where they fall down into the underworld. And what they find is, as they're brought into the underworld, is that that serpent that had bit the queen is actually an evil witch, and that she had enchanted the Prince Rilian, and she holds him captive. She has an enchantment over him so that he follows her and does whatever she wants. But every evening he regains his senses, and so what she does is she ties him into this silver chair that keeps him from breaking free while he's in his right mind. And then when that passes, he's released again. And so the children have to find him and release him, and there's this confrontation with the queen and all of that. And what ends up coming out is that the queen had this kind of master plan that she was about to execute, which was to dig a hole into Narnia and release an army of Earthmen and take over Narnia and put Rilian on the throne as a puppet of sorts. And so all of that ends up coming out and getting resolved in the course of the story. It's a really wonderful, creative story. Very much has echoes of like Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene, the great medieval epic of this kind of quest of chivalry and so forth. And so it's a really wonderful story. A couple of things that I really love about The Silver Chair and that stood out to me on a reread of it. One thing that's just kind of a funny side thing, Lewis, of course, was an academic. He was a professor for many years, and he was living and teaching at a time where a lot of modern educational theories and things were coming more into vogue, and some of the traditional ways of teaching were shifting and changing, right? And Lewis was not a fan of those things, and he uses the Narnia books to often kind of poke holes at modern education, modern pedagogical approaches, and so forth. And so you see that in the Voyage, or you see that in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Even the old professor. What do they teach them in these schools? Kind of thing. And it comes out a lot here as well, because Eustace and Jill are students at this school called Experiment House, and it's a very progressive school. And he has a whole kind of commentary on that kind of runs through the books. He'll make references back to Experiment House throughout the book, and it kind of plays a role at the end of the book. I won't spoil that piece, but that's a fun kind of line for those of us who are interested in education, to just kind of get Lewis's humorous take on many of the modern assumptions and approaches to education and formation. So that's a fun thing. Second thing I really appreciate about this book, one of the things that is set up at the beginning of the book, and it's a theme that runs throughout, is that when Jill and Eustace are pulled into Narnia, they're not actually pulled into Narnia first of all, they're pulled into Aslan's country. So that's cool in itself. We get to sort of see at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book these little windows into Aslan's country, which we were brought right up to at the end of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So that's a neat thing in itself. But in Aslan's country, Aslan tells Jill that they're going to be sent on this quest. And he says that there are signs that he is going to give them that they should remember, that they should meditate on, that they should recite to each other, so that when they meet those signs, they'll know what to expect and they'll know what to do. And one of the themes through the book is that they forget the signs. They forget to remember them and to meditate on them and to share them, and so they end up missing out on help that Aslan was going to send them, and so forth. And it's an interesting kind of thing that runs through it, and I think has a lot of instruction for believers, because of course I think what we're supposed to hear echoed in that is a picture of how we are to live in relation with the Word of God. Aslan, of course, is that Christ figure in the Narnia stories, and in the same way that Aslan gives Jill what she needs ahead of time, God has given us his word to prepare us for our own pilgrimage, for our own journey, for our own quest. And Lewis is picking up on a very old way of thinking of the Christian life as a sort of quest. And yet, like Jill and Eustace, we can often forget the signs that God has given us. We forget or neglect the word that he has given to our own detriment, to our own peril. And so I think that whole thread running through the story is one that is well worth kind of thinking about and grappling with. And one of the things that Lewis kind of points out with this is that, Aslan will give the verbal sign, right? Here's what you're going to see. But when they actually see it in the real world, it doesn't look like what they expect. And that's part of what creates this disconnect. When they live by sight and not by the word that they've been given, they are often led astray because, and this is one of the big themes through the book, appearances can be deceiving. That's one of the kind of core themes that Lewis develops, because you have, for example, Puddleglum, the Marshwiggle who becomes their guide, that the children quickly kind of view as either just a depressing character, a dour character, someone that can be dismissed, or someone who's like an impediment to their actual mission. And so they tend to have a very dim view of him at the beginning of the book. In the end of the book, he ends up becoming kind of the main hero, and without him, the whole quest would have fallen away, and he proves himself to be a very brave and faithful companion, but he doesn't look like it. There's a very important scene, though, where they actually meet the witch and Prince Rilian above ground, although they don't know who they are, and she seems to be lovely and kind and beautiful and gentle, and so they end up following her advice, and that's what leads them to the giants that they end up having to run away from at the end of the book. But again, one guide seems like someone you'd want to follow. One guide seems like someone who's trying to hold them back. The actuality is reversed. And Lewis plays again with that whole theme of appearances can be deceiving in terms of the giants themselves. They go to this city of giants, or this castle, and it's called, they're called the Gentle Giants. But it turns out, as they're in this house, that the giants are planning on eating them for their autumn feast. So again, appearances can be deceiving. And then they slip underground. They encounter the Earthmen, who seem to be these dark, dour, sinister creatures. But later, when the witch is actually defeated, it turns out that these Earthmen were actually slaves and pawns of the witch, and they were as opposed to her as anyone. So again, appearances can be deceiving. And then, of course, the witch herself seems to be this beautiful lady. In the end, she turns back into the serpent, and that's who they fight, and she's defeated. Appearances can be deceiving. So that's a theme that runs throughout the book. And Lewis really explores that really well, which is so instructive for us in our Christian life, because I think that's one of the things that if we are not soaked in God's word beforehand, we often won't recognize the thing the word has told us about when we encounter it. If we're living by sight, by our own emotions, by our own circumstances, tossed about, by all sorts of things, then we're not going to be grounded in the word that God has given. So Lewis really expertly kind of explores that. One last thing that I really appreciate about the Silver Chair, there is this scene where the children have been taken into the underworld. They meet Prince Rilian. He's tied to the Silver Chair. It comes out that he is actually the prince, and they release him, and then the queen walks in. And so here you have the two children, the Marshwiggle, the prince, and they're all arrayed against the queen. And it would seem like they could easily defeat her, right? But she begins to engage in this conversation with them. She begins to put on this incense that's burning on the fireplace, and she's playing this enchanting music, and she's just talking to them. And she begins to try to convince them that that there is no overland, there is no world that they belong to except for what they're experiencing right then and there. That underworld that she rules over is the real world. There is nothing beyond that, and all of their ideas of things like the sun and the sky and all of that is really just made up. It's child's play. It's a fairy tale. And she begins to kind of enchant them, and there's this whole back and forth that takes place as each of the companions tries to argue with her, and then kind of one by one they slip under her spell. I think what Lewis is doing here is a really insightful exploration of apologetics in a narrative form. He's showing how the world fights against and argues against Christianity, and how Christians should be braced for that encounter. Because there's kind of two levels that's going on. One is the level of argument, and on the surface, that's what's happening. There's an exchange of ideas, there's different views, and they're arguing about what's true and what's not true. But there's another layer behind that, and I think this is what is particularly insightful, that there's a layer not just of argument, but of enchantment. That there's an ethos, there's an incense, there's a background music, as it were, that is shaping and impacting how open the characters are to the influence of the witch, that goes beyond the level of logic and argument. And I think that in itself is really insightful. And when we see that, right, that we are intellectual beings, and when people are wrestling with the claims of Christianity, intellectual questions are kind of one level at which those discussions take place. But there's another level of more subjective, emotional, experiential, sociological, all of those factors come into play as well. And if we're going to engage with the enemy in that sense, have those apologetic conversations, we've got to realize it's not just about the argument. There's more going on, and that's part of what we have to be aware of. And there's a lot too that he does in terms of the actual content of the arguments. That again, he's kind of working with a Christian Neoplatonism that I think is spot on in that the real world is the world made more real, as it were. And part of the argument of the witch, which very much mirrors that of kind of modernism and materialism, which was very prevalent in Lewis's day, is still with us today, wants to kind of reduce the world down to one dimension and ignore all of these other things. And so anyways, Lewis does a lot with that that's really, really wonderful. But yeah, it's a phenomenal book, great story. It connects well with the flow of the series, and it's interesting too. One last thing I'll say is, you have the Narnia books, but 3 out of the 7 books don't take place in Narnia, really. So the Voyage of the Dawn Treader is not in Narnia. You're not actually in the land of Narnia at all. In the Silver Chair, they're only in Narnia for a little bit at the beginning and a little bit at the end, but mostly it's a quest book taking place outside of Narnia. And similarly with The Horse and His Boy, it's going to be focused on Calormen and Archenland. So Lewis does that in a way that's really interesting, to kind of tell the story of Narnia from outside of Narnia in these books. But this is a wonderful kind of line in there. When you have to pick, they're all good. All of the Narnia books are really good. I don't know that The Silver Chair is like one of my top, 1 or 2 of the series, but it's so well written, so insightful. It's a great story in its own right, and again, for the reasons I've mentioned, it explores some really valuable themes about how to stay grounded, how to be faithful as a Christian, and how to live out your pilgrimage, your quest, in a way that honors God. So Lewis does all of that so expertly and so beautifully. And so I would encourage you, if you have not read, to read, and if you have read, pick it up and reread The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis.